Today we talk about the future of U.S.-Japan relations. U.S.-Japan relations are in a very interesting period of time. U.S. and Japan now have new leaders at both ends. President Biden, of course, was inaugurated last month, and then taking over from Trump administration. Prime Minister Suga took over prime ministership from Abe administration. And both administrations, the Trump administration took 4 years, and then Abe administration actually took 8 years. That is very long for the Japanese standard. So what will happen for what Ambassador Mansfield used to say that this is the most important international relationship in the world, U.S.-Japan relationship. What will happen U.S.-Japan relationship under these two new leaders? So continuity and difference are the key words of the U.S.-Japan relationship and today's discussion.
We can't handle the China challenge without Japan. And I would argue that no country in the world is more important to or more influential on the American approach to China now. When I first started working on Japan in the 1980s, it was a very different situation. In 1988, in public opinion polls done by Gallup, the American public said that Japan's economy was a greater threat than Soviet nuclear weapons in 1988. And even as recently as 2012, when the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, which does polling of the American public on international issues, when they asked the American public in 2012, how should we deal with China? Should we prioritize cooperating with China, or should we try to deal with China by strengthening ties with Japan and other US allies in Asia like Korea and Australia? And in 2012, more Americans picked China. They said China was more important. We have to hook our wagon to China, not Japan, in 2012. Well, in 2019, when the Chicago Council asked that question of the American public again, 7 years later, over 2/3 of Americans said we should work with Japan. And at CSIS, where I also work, we did a survey of the American public, and overwhelmingly people said the best way to deal with China is to lock arms with Japan and build our position with friends and allies so that we can deal with China from a position of strength. And that is a very, very broad consensus in not only Washington, but in the general public. But there's been a remarkable change in how much Americans trust Japan. So trade is an absolutely critical tool for stability in Asia, for international security. And I would very much like the Biden administration to rejoin CPTPP. 60% of Americans in public opinion polls support it. 80% of thought leaders in agriculture, in every sector except labor. And even in labor, it's 50-50 in the surveys that we've done at CSIS. The problem is TPP and big trade agreements like NAFTA before that have gotten a bad name in a few key parts of the country, like Ohio and Michigan and Western Pennsylvania, that are really, really critical for presidential elections. So the Biden team didn't talk about TPP at all in this last election cycle, and President Trump ran against it. So I don't see any political capital or momentum or mandate that the Biden team has built to go into TPP. I hope they go for it.
One aspect I'll just mention that we're closely tracking is the Japan-U.S. Strategic Energy Partnership, or otherwise known as JUSEP. And, this is a natural area of cooperation for U.S. and Japanese companies. We've been partnering on projects, energy and infrastructure projects for years, just ask Mitsubishi Heavy. And, to do it in third countries makes a lot of sense. There are certain challenges when it comes to the implementation of it, though. The first one that comes to mind is just there's a lack of a solid pipeline of bankable projects. So, US and Japanese companies might want to partner on a project, but it's really difficult to identify those projects. And so one way that JBIC is working on this issue is sending more investment officers out to the field to create this pipeline of projects. Secondly, there's still a little bit of perception that such investments entail high risk. So, in the form of adverse regulatory decisions or breach of contract by governments. And so that's something that we still have to contend with. And then third, I would just say that, in some of these developing Indo-Pacific nations, sometimes the officials lack the ability to assess competing bids or contracts of competing bids for energy and infrastructure projects. So, assessing life cycle construction costs or terms of debt repayment, for instance. And then, it can be very complicated to oversee the implementation of a very large project. So, I know the U.S. government's working on this in terms of building capacity, at the local level so that officials can make the right decision and adequately assess which projects which contracts are competitive. Now, one other thing that gives me optimism is just, the technology that a lot of these Japanese companies are investing in. And, I think it's pretty remarkable that just in the, it's only February, I guess, like 11th or something right now. I actually can't tell what day it is because it's, pandemic. So, I think it's remarkable that both General Motors and Nissan have made these ambitious pledges on electric vehicles. I mean, I never imagined that General Motors would. And so I think that you'll start to see a lot of companies like S&P Global, our chair company, just announced their own pledge to become net zero in terms of carbon emissions. And some of these companies are making that target even sooner than 2050. So I do think that, these kind of pledges by both Prime Minister Suga and President Biden give us a lot of hope that together with the private sector, these governments can achieve these ambitious goals.
U.S.-Japan alliance is a comprehensive scheme, not just about a military alliance, but of course it covers economic domain and even value. I mean, these three domains, power aspect and interest aspect and value aspect. I mean, and the rise of China, of course, causes challenges to these three dimensions. Working with other regional countries, across the board, economic, security, value, if possible, I think is going to it's going to become a very important sort of infrastructure, so to speak, in the changing, rapidly changing strategic sort of realities in the region. And this is what has been lacking in the past, I think most conspicuously. I mean, regional countries working together. And so my sort of middle power strategy is to put a strategic focus on developing this sort of regional networks. And Japan's power is of course the greatest among these group of these regional countries. So this power source should be used to sort of create sort of infrastructure of cooperation among regional countries. So on the basis of this, we deal with China. And of course, alliance with the US is very critical. Without the US presence, these regional efforts would not mean much. I mean, in the region as well as vis-a-vis China. So the importance of alliance is, of course, unquestionable. And Japan needs the United States, and the United States needs Japan. I think this is almost constant. But of course, there are issues to be managed, dealing with this aspect, and which, of course, we count on Mike Green a lot, day by day or month by month or year by year. And so these shifting somewhat in relative terms, of course, a strategic focus on the regional dimension is what has been lacking in Japan and what is needed in coming years.